The engine made a horrible noise I will never forget. I was on the other side of the IV as the patient myself. It's like the Matrix. Lucky enough to never have more than a bruise. So I had a partial engine failure in one of our flying club airplanes, my favorite airplane. It was day I was off from work. It was a nice day, and I was planning to take a sunset flight westward. I took off. It was a little turbulent, and I just had a bad feeling. I cannot say that anything looked awry, but I had a bad feeling, and I still remember it very clearly, that something wasn't right. So I had asked for a cruising altitude of 4,500 feet. So I got up to my cruising altitude. Everything seemed fine. And at the moment, I was exactly 22 nautical miles away from Albany. Suddenly, my RPMs went from like 2,500 to 1,800. The engine made a horrible noise I will never forget. I lost about 500 feet of altitude, and I will never forget this entire experience. Just immediately think, oh my God, something horrible just happened. So the moment this happened, I look over to this gauge, see that I completely lost the third cylinder. The little bar just went down to zero. I immediately said, okay, where am I? What's the closest place for me to get the airplane on the ground? But I knew that there was a chance, of course, that I could lose the rest of the cylinders, and then I would have, then I would be a glider. And I got on the radio with Albany Approach. I was still talking to them, and I said, "Listen, I'm having some trouble with my engine. I want to come back to the field." I headed back towards the field, and it was very uncoordinated. The whole cowling was just vibrating and shaking around. Every step along the way, I was thinking, at any moment, I could lose everything. And I know that that's possible. And now that I'm finally like in the little bubble where I know that even if I lose the engine, I can get down to that runway. There's no reason not to take it. So I said, yep, I'll take runway 1. But in any case, I landed the plane without any difficulty. Hands were shaking. They had asked me if I needed assistance. I said, no, everything was okay. And I called our maintenance officer and said, something really bad happened. And I think this applies to pretty much everything in life. You just can't freak out. You're not going to function well. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are. I had 2 bad infections, cholangitis and cholecystitis. So basically I had an infection in the common bile duct and infection in the gallbladder, all precipitated by stones in the gallbladder. I was very sick and everything happened very suddenly, but yeah, it was an adventure. One that I hope not to repeat. I mean, it's something that, just like really any infection, essentially, could it be fatal? Yes. Was I very sick? Yes. There are an awful lot of things that can go wrong in the process. And, it was scary. Also, I think for me, I hate being or feeling like I'm out of control, that I can't control the situation myself, that I can't fix it myself. I was in a very vulnerable position, I think, because of that. I think of myself as a very empathetic person, but to have the experience myself and be able to understand how patients feel powerless and afraid in a situation like that was really great in retrospect. It's hard when you're aware of every single thing that can go wrong. And of course, when I was in the situation myself, that's all I could think about. Well, this can go wrong, that can go wrong. Sometimes that can be of some benefit if you are a patient and you don't have any connection to healthcare in any way. So it's just totally unfamiliar. It might seem more black and white, but nothing in medicine is black and white. Similar to flying and probably everything else in life. There are many gray areas, and I think that's what makes it scary, but yet also fascinating. I admitted multiple patients with similar problems who would be likely undergoing all of the same procedures that I underwent. When it came up in conversation, they said, well, how is this going to go? How is that going to go? How am I going to feel? How will I get back to work? So it was useful to me to be able to say, well, let me tell you, the same thing just happened to me. And here's what I experienced as the patient. Because I think beforehand, at least with this particular type of illness, I would say, well, this is what the statistics show. It's different for the patient, though, to hear, oh, wow, this happened to you. I think they appreciate your opinion that much more. I think it is a way for you to form an additional connection with another person. And that human connection really is the thing that attracts me to medicine the most. It always has been. I definitely had my fair share of spectacular falls where I've cartwheeled down the mountain. I did that once when I was in uniform in Vail. I was gonna, I was already like a few minutes late. So I just went hurling down in flat light. And as I was almost down to the bottom, there was like a death cookie that I didn't see. Somehow, I don't know. I don't even know what happened. All I know is that like I said, cartwheeled down the rest of, this entire face. Believe it or not, anytime that I've had anything like that happen, in a race course or on the hill, I have, knock on wood, been lucky enough to never have more than a bruise. I've never damaged a helmet either, despite having opportunities for that to have happened. I've never had a run-in with a tree. And I think maybe I'm just lucky. The only other thing I have to offer is that it's an interesting phenomenon when you fall or something happens that isn't what you're anticipating. If you have this ability to let your body kind of ragdoll, you're less likely to get injured. And I think part of that ties into your confidence and your fear about the situation. It's an interesting story. So when I was ski instructing in Vail, I was there for 3 seasons full time. Obviously, you can't ski in the summer in Vail, but the second summer that I was out there, I was like, you know what? I'm going to learn how to fly an airplane. And so I thought, let me call up Eagle County Regional Airport and see if they have they had a little flight school called Due West Aviation. And I set up a lesson the next day. And I loved it, and I continued to pursue that. I flew, I did a fair amount of solo flight in and around Vail, Grand Junction, Rifle, Hayden, Steamboat Springs. I really breezed through my instrument rating. I think of everything, I thought that was the easiest. And this is always how I am. The things that other people think are harder, I think are easier. And then the stuff that everybody else thinks is easy, for some reason, is harder for me. And that has been the same with every exam I've taken in medicine. I started medical school in August of 2002. So fast forward, medical school, I hardly flew at all through those 4 years. And then eventually I did a family medicine residency in upstate New York. That's how I ended up here. The more interested I get in something, the better I want to get, and I want to just keep increasing my skill set. Particularly as of late, I've gotten very interested in, and that's a flow state. When you're in a state where you are functioning probably better than you normally could, everything seems like it slows down. You're hyper-focused, yet you're also simultaneously extremely calm. It's like the best feeling ever. However, to get into this state, you have to have some type of fear stimulus in all the studies that have been done. But the key is the fear can't be so profound that you tip over the edge. There's a tipping point where you will fall apart, cortisol will take over, and everything you do will be greatly impaired. But if you can walk that fine line, you will do better than you would in any other circumstance. So it's like the Matrix. I feel like this is, with special effects in movies, you could picture it. And I still remember that day and other times in my life when I've had moments like this where it's bizarre. Well, like everything becomes quiet. You hear only what you need to hear. You're moving really quickly, but in what you see is that everything is happening slowly, and you have this perception that is extremely heightened beyond what you would normally have. And it's one of my favorite things about flying. It's one of my favorite things about my job. It's a life goal. If I could get into this state 24/7, I think that would make me happy or happier. I had a great experience with that rating. I had my first 2 women instructors, Sarah and Laura. They were both fantastic. All of my prior instructors had been men. Anybody who knows me knows I'm totally a girl power person. So to have had that at my most advanced rating taught just by women was really fantastic. And they were great. It remains in aviation largely dominated by men. I think the latest data is that maybe somewhere around 7% of all pilots are women. So that means that 93% are men. It's interesting. In medicine, this has very much evened out. But for some reason in aviation, it hasn't. And I find that very curious. I think it is important for women to encourage other women and to make it very clear that you're not limited in any way. I'm a member of the 99s. That's kind of my local connection to a bigger group, the International Organization of Women Pilots. I hope that we keep making strides in that direction. I'm very artistically inclined. I actually majored in music in college. I began as a pianist, and I then became more voice oriented. I taught myself how to play the electric guitar. I'm not, I don't want you to think I'm Lenny Kravitz. I'm not, not particularly good at it. I can do basic things. And the other thing that I pursue is paint. I have an art studio in my house. One that was something I really wanted, but I think I really am at heart an artist. And I think that everything that I love, medicine and flying, skiing, I think it's all an art. I don't see any of this as a scientific algorithm. I never have. And that's what I think is beautiful about all of these different things that I love personally. The airplane I had the engine failure in, I have that cylinder, and it's part of a painting that I did, a three-dimensional painting.